Thank you very much for being here. It's always a pleasure. Second year. We could do it again. So this time, we're going to talk about transforming traditional business. Two kind of heavy words about, transform and traditional. We'd rather say evolve current businesses, but I guess, there are some other consulting firms that have bigger budgets than us, so they position that marketing-wise. So we're going to discuss, the goal here, and please take a seat. The goal here is to discuss some interesting aspects towards, transformation. Do we strategize and then execute? Do we strategize through execution? Do we build to discover? Do we discover to build? How do we manage product? How do we integrate people? All those kinds of things that, normally traditional businesses or current businesses ask themselves. They spend a lot of money on consulting budgets just to be prepared. Well, maybe, we just have to kind of start doing and trying before and while we're trying, we're getting ready. So there are various points of views that we can treat, and I have a great, exceptional panel here. I'm going to introduce them, the three of them. Why we think, they're great is because these guys come from verticals that are very traditional, long-standing, like education and mostly healthcare, nonprofit, as charity funding and campaigning, and they've innovated in their field. But also they come from traditional businesses, so they will be able to kind of bridge the gap between, what happened then and what they did to make it happen. So here we have Bala Balachander, K12. He's a CTO. He is responsible for driving K12's software platform strategy, including the design and development of innovative education solutions, programs, courses, and products, as well as the system platforms to support product creation and delivery. Prior to joining K12, he was a senior vice president of product development education platforms at Blackboard, and he led product development and product management as a SVP, Blackboard Engage, and held client as a CTO roles in Macro Hill, Pearson School Technologies, and Big Chalk. And then we have Jason Zachariah. He's the president of Rehab Care, which is a division of Kindred Healthcare, and he currently serves as president of Rehab Services, a division of Kindred that consists of 20 rehabilitation hospitals, over 100 acute rehab units, and 1,700 skilled nursing and assisted living facilities, a role he actually started in 2013. And before that, he served in various roles in the company's hospital division, including COO and executive director for the division's California-Arizona district. So, a lot of experience there in healthcare. And then we have Mark Hedstrom. He's an entrepreneur of the group. He's been in several startups, and he is currently the SVP Global Operations at the Movember Foundation, which is timely. And he basically, started several startups, and now, they've created this worldwide massive campaign to raise awareness on cancer and several other illnesses, as well as raising funds to contribute to fight those diseases. So it's a great pleasure to have you guys. Thank you very much. So the first question is, we're talking about transformations and traditional and those things, but the first point is, how do we think like the customer, right? So in many cases, when the companies are, grow big and evolve and become heavy, that's what we normally call traditional, but, current really, not so much traditional. We see that there is this disconnect between what's happening with the customer, their needs, what they see as valuable, and what we are currently delivering, or what we believe, mostly at the top of the company, that we're delivering. So it would be great to understand from each of you, how you feel, your business model kind of differentiates, and who is your customer. Define the customer first. Would you like to start, Jason?
Yeah, coming from traditional healthcare, Kindred healthcare is even probably more traditional, is that we play in the post-acute care space. So this is largely what you would think of skilled nursing facilities, rehabilitation hospitals, home health. And they've been kind of laggards in terms of both the consumer experience and bringing technology and connecting that way, and also transparency. So one thing is, over the last several years, I've taken our rehabilitation platform and really looked at that customer, largely the patient and family, but also because we partner with so many hospitals and health systems, including skilled nursing providers, is how they have to think too. And we know that if we can get to their patient and family, we'll create a more valuable partnership with them. And then finally is the doctors, right? They are in a time and space where they used to have for many decades the power of the pen. They were very trusted. They still are very trusted, but there's a lot more knowledge coming from the consumer, and they're challenged each and every day. In addition, we like to say we're a publicly regulated utility because 80% of our funding comes from the government. And CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has put a lot of pressure on the value and the quality of healthcare, and they're leaning into that transparency as well. So a lot of different contexts of market dynamics going on. So starting with the patient and family, is that need for transparency is huge. And when I like Martine's discussion on, that emotional connection that the patient and family needs, and not just a transactional where we're providing rehab at the bedside or a nurse is coming and delivering medication. It has to be something much more connected because patients want to see progress. What is it going to take to make them successful so they can get home safely? And really the family, at least in American healthcare, there's a lot of feeling that you're hiding something. And the ability to be transformational in terms of communication in real time, and we believe that there's some opportunities there using digital and tech as they go through that rehab experience. So really a digital journey as they're being rehabilitated. And then finally for the doctors, is that there's a lot of compliance and quality being put in, and that's where we worked with Globant and another organization, Kentucky company, Interap, and really trying to make compliance much more easy for the doctor to navigate through. And we believe that that's important too in that experience, because those doctors are going through a lot of emotions. They have a lot more work to do from a documentation and that like, so we have to understand how do we make their lives easier in a space, so that's where we're trying to lean in as well with that customer.
Hey, thank you, Jason. Bala, in terms of, education is such a hot topic, right? So much disruption there. What do you think how do you understand, how the customer is evolving in their needs? I mean, customer in this case, it's kids, it's teachers, it's content generators, schools. How do you normally go about, understanding what's next, and basically all those subjacent needs that are there in the model of in the modeling of the next, of the next student, right? Of those tools. How does that work?
Before I sort of jump into that and give you an answer, sure. I think it might help to provide a little bit of a context on what is it that we do. So K-12, we operate. We have a couple of different business units, but the primary one, we operate online virtual schools for K through 12 kids. So think about that for a second. So in other words, we have already been in the disruption phase, right? There are about 55 million students in the US, and this is still a very nascent market, which is less than, maybe about 2 million kids who want to do their K-12 education completely online. And there are a number of different reasons for that. And most of it, one common theme that sort of runs through that is that for whatever reason, the public school system, the traditional brick and mortar system, has not worked for those kids. So in some ways, we think of providing choice to our students and parents, because there are a number of kids where the traditional school system is not working. So they now have an opportunity to do this thing completely virtual and completely online, right? So that's a pretty big shift and disruption, if you will. And that's why it's nascent. It's not for everybody, right? It's still less than 2% or 3% of the total addressable market in terms of if you look at it. But it's a fundamentally different thing. So in terms of what we look at from a customer perspective, it's obviously the students and the parents, so there's a lot of similarity with what Jason was talking about. But there is also, we don't own these online virtual schools. These are essentially charter schools that are run in different states, but we run them for them. So we have what is called a board. So a lot of compliance requirements, once again, pretty similar, because the boards get funding from the government. So then you obviously have to make sure that the kids are being successful in it, and that they are attending the school, right? And attendance of a virtual school is very different from an attendance in brick and mortar, so there are lots of different nuances that you need to look at. So what we tend to do is we collect, to go to your original point about, how do you aggregate or how do you look at different things, is we have to balance the different needs of all of them, right? So we have to balance the needs of the parents and the students. We need to balance the needs of the boards. We need to balance the needs of the teachers who are studying, who are teaching them, as well as we need to balance the need for accountability and compliance requirements that the state may demand. And so it's a part art, part science, I guess, because you're not going to get a one size fits all, because different states have different necessary. So one of the things we tend to do is look at it always from the marketplace, right? And then figure out what is the best thing for this particular market for all the different stakeholders, and quite a bit of prioritization that takes place.
Great, thank you. Mark, doing a little bit of research on Movember yesterday, I found that Movember, it's a huge success in terms of engagement, right? It's just, everybody knows about it. And think, what is it? It's a campaign, but, you see the guys with mustache. It's incredible, and it's worldwide, right? So it's a great example of omni-relevance, really, because you're everywhere. So the question is, and by the way, between brackets, we worked on a product, I didn't know, by the way, FIFA Ultimate Team 14, where we actually created, in the game modes, as Global has worked with Electronic Arts for many years, and the game modes is a Movember team. So we even, you even are at a AAA video game level. So that's a channel that a fundraising campaign wouldn't ever, touch. It's what's very interesting for me to learn. So how did you get to that level of engagement? What was the use of the digital channel to understand that need and basically, spread it out like wildfire? How did that happen?
Sure. I mean, a little bit about Movember, or Movember, for those here. Some of the folks know us as this thing that just happens this time of year, but we're actually a global foundation that has been in operation since 2003. We were founded in Melbourne, Australia. We operate in 21 countries around the world, and to date we've raised $710 million for men's health initiatives at a global level, and we invest in about 1,200 programs to date. It's hard to say kind of how we got to where we are. Literally, it was a couple guys sitting in a bar in Melbourne, Australia, having a drink, talking about why the mustache fell off the face of men's fashion. And so they challenged a bunch of their buddies that year to grow a mustache with them. And what that's done, though, and we refer to our Mobros and the women that support them as walking, talking billboards for Movember. They are our mouthpiece. We've had about 5.5 million people participate in Movember globally. We've had about 16 million individual donations in our 13 years. But we're known as a nonprofit, and we invest heavily in men's health initiatives, about $300+ million in prostate cancer alone. But we started out as quite frankly, a tech company. We built our own model. We built crowdsourcing before crowdsourcing was cool in the nonprofit space. And we ultimately leveraged social media. So we started in social media. Facebook was founded in 2004. We jumped right on that, and we continue to do so today. We actually are in a test phase with a couple organizations in the social media space about how do you leverage and move forward donation and create social connectivity across multiple platforms, including in the gaming industry. So one of our challenges, though, is that we have two different customers. Those that support the community that fundraises every year and grows mustaches or gets physically active or hosts events for us. And there's that community, but there's also the community of men that we serve at a global level, and that's a very different group. So we have, on average, our average MoBro, or Mo-Sista, is about 30 years old. They're heavily invested in tech, they're online, they're social, and they believe in social giving. But what they're doing and what they're helping us doing is what's called impact investing in the nonprofit space, which is simply our real customer base are the men that we serve at a global level. So prostate cancer patients are typically 50 years old or older. So we have two different products that we ultimately put on the market. One is a product to help us fundraise every Movember, which is the mustache, which is getting men and women active, which is getting people to host events on our behalf. The other is actually, we developed a digital health platform called True North in prostate cancer. It's a $40 million global initiative to help men and their families navigate prostate cancer. So from the moment a man is diagnosed with prostate cancer, we ask the question, what quality of life do you expect at the end of this journey? Where do you want to be? And we ask that not just of the man, but of the care team that's around them, as well as their partners and their family. So we know, as they're going through that journey of prostate cancer treatment, that at the end of it, that man's going to end up in the right space. And that's not just a physical health question, that's a mental health question. So we have two different consumer bases. So we've evolved from this simple idea of two guys in a bar having a conversation, reconnecting with each other, to taking something as simple, and some would say silly, like a mustache, and getting men to engage in a conversation that we're not terribly good at having in the first place.
Great, and you're giving me the perfect segue for my next question. So, simple, silly, you said, just small, right? And now let's contrast that with the typical scenario where you have a bank or an insurance company or a retail business where they consult with X, we don't want to say who, and we get to this transformational waves where we're going to have to plan for 3 months or 6 months, and we're going to have to go to practice sessions without any delivery. We live here, I mean, a lot of people live here in Silicon Valley, and we know kind of how, real innovation is done. It's just done step by step and basically putting the client in the center of the game and testing every time, as quickly as possible, because we don't want to be, as arrogant enough to say, we know it all. And so how do you, what's your advice? And this is completely open, right? To these businesses that are engaged in those lengthy process of quote-unquote transformation. What is your advice, based on your experiences, of what works and what doesn't?
You guys are looking at me, so maybe I'll go first. I don't know. It is simple. I think we've, in our 13 years, have tried to do a lot. So every new technology, every new social media platform that came along, we started down the path, and then we realized we were trying to do too much across too many different things. And as a nonprofit, our capital is very restricted. We don't have the ability to go out and spend a lot of money on new technologies. We own all the IP behind our fundraising platform, but we've got to do that on a very small dime. So we have to keep it simple from our perspective, and we always come back to the simple idea of changing your appearance, which is that the root of Movember and getting guys to grow that mustache as the way to engage in the larger thing we're trying to do in this world, which is get men to connect and have a conversation. So simplicity is key. And as being mentioned before by Martine, this idea of transaction moving beyond that to emotive. The idea of getting men to talk and open up about their issues and what they're facing, whether it's physical or mental health associated, is the core of what we do. We're a cause-associated brand. We're emotive. If you look at our creative, it's about men being in a space together with women around them, and the question of, not to invoke this sense of loss outwardly, but if one of those men wasn't there, would this experience have happened? If you had 5 or 6 more years with your uncle, your father, or with your son, what would that be like? And what would it be like with your partner? So we actually started with the emotion, and now we've moved back into transactional. We move back into making sure that we're always finding the best ways to raise revenue for the programs that we fund.
I think you actually talked about 2 things.
Yeah.
One, I think, is simple, but other is sort of unstated, was speed, right? And I actually think it depends on the industry, and depends on what is it that you're doing. So in education, I think simple always works because simple can easily resonate with people and what is it that you're trying to do, there's a focus behind it. But I think speed is interesting in the sense that, depending on the industry that you play in, you have to be cognizant of what those things are, because at the end of the day, we are playing with kids' education. And it's their life, in some sense the future is at stake. And what you don't want to do is experiment with every newfangled idea that comes along saying, now this is the best thing since sliced bread, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. I mean, yes, there are a lot of problems, I would say, and limitations of existing public school systems, but they've been around for a while, and there are some good things about it as well. So I think we have to be careful about not jumping on every single shiny new bandwagon that comes along. So the trick is to say, for us, when you talk about products, we use the term efficacy, right? And unfortunately, efficacy doesn't come in 6 months. Efficacy often comes in 3 years. So you need to plan for that. So you can be simple, but I don't think you can be fast, or you can. So I really do think it depends on the industry. If it's a consumer industry, absolutely, keep doing and innovate every few days if you can. But I think it's a little harder on the education, and I'm sure it's a little harder on the healthcare side too, which is even worse. You're playing with my life. I don't want you to try different things.
So we're naturally entering an area of agility, right? So everybody's talking about agile, and everybody tries one way or another, and a lot of people think they're doing it well. A lot of people are thinking they're doing it wrong, and there's always this polemic around agile. How is a company with such an important mission, right, in executing and in basically, how do you make a triumph of each? You don't want to go to rehab, but if you have to, you want every day to be a triumph, right? So how do you, in terms of products and how you incorporate digital there, how do you create those emotions, and how do you keep it going without, as Bala said, trying things that could be dangerous for a patient?
Great question, Andres. So in terms of rehabilitation and that life-changing event, unfortunately, that a lot of patients and their families go through, you can instantly resonate with them if you can really get at the core of a couple emotions, right? And the one is obviously the conquering through the human spirit. So that's that that transparency and really taking people on that digital journey. So we've leaned into literally through, transactional with the application where our therapists are feeding the rehabilitation outcomes, number of steps, their pain, their ability to transfer from bed to chair to, obviously the bathroom, and those are quality of life measures. But then really make them feel like you're humanizing that, right? It's not just metrics and medical and clinical outcomes, but really where that's going to change to dancing with their daughter, going fishing, like the experience, right? And so at the end of the day, a lot of patients, they're coming and their families want to have that experience, not about getting their blood pressure down or addressing the medical complexity. It's really about returning to their prior level of function. All of us have probably had the flu or a cold. You're just trying to get back to that prior level of function you had before that. And the ability for us to use tech has been, really interesting in that we're able to now obviously create loyalty through that, and also at the end of the day, show that we are different than that of our competitors. So that's been, not where we're just going to come in and just tell all of our 20,000 therapists or hundreds of doctors that we have within our delivery platform to just go use it. It has to be that they're highly knowledgeable and skilled workers, obviously. They're passionate about their craft. So to just say technology is the answer. So we have to be, through Agile, is really testing in a way that we're enhancing their engagement with patients and families, and that's where we're finding the wins. And so yes, we pilot, but then we make sure we're getting it out very clearly of what the patient family experience was, and then that's the emotional connection to our own workforce, right? So that's been kind of the success there through kind of the Agile design that we.
That's great. I had a signal there. Time flew. It's been fascinating. So let's open it up for Brad. Where is Brad? Brad is going to help us. Let's ask him some questions, please. Yeah, questions. Audience.
Hi. I would like to ask, in this moment of great stimuli, especially at early stages, when we have a lot of different attentions that are really going into different places, what's the key to really generate a big motivation and engagement with end users, especially when they are very young? And I see young people just holding mobile phones or iPads at very early stages, and it's difficult then to do some learning tracks where we capture that attention. What's the key there, and especially also for gaming as well? So how to capture those young kids?
Yeah, I think, and unfortunately there's no secret sauce, right? Because I think what we really need to look at is what makes them engage, but at the same time, what is pedagogically sound? What that essentially just means is, are they learning what they're supposed to learn, right? So yes, there are a lot of games out there, and yes, there are a lot of wonderful game-based products, but I think all of them have to make the fundamental thing of learning as the process. So one of the things we look at is, and first of all, I think it's vastly different what is engaging for a 5-year-old to what is engaging for a 15 or 17-year-old, right? Because one of the things we initially tried is maybe we should try lots of different animations and things of that sort, even in high school. Turns out, actually, the kids are not interested in that. The kids want to spend the least amount of time to understand what is it that they need to understand. So even though we may think that we are doing something really engaging, if that's not directly relevant to their understanding that concept, they tend to turn off. So I think what we are looking at is clearly for the younger grades, more game-based or character-based is probably a better way to describe it, because we have found that young kids identify with different characters, and if you sort of let them customize a little bit of that character is even better, right? And then we look at the middle and high school to say which ones. High school tends to be more, give me exactly what I need, and let me spend the least amount of time doing what I need to do because I have to go, spend my time with friends or whatever the case may be. So I think it's really different across the board. The one thing that really that we have spent a lot of time, and Globant has helped us, is rather than trying to figure out what is it that they like, we try to look at all the data that we have, right? And say, why are our kids spending more time on this particular lesson? And why is that? And so we are trying to really look at the analytics side of all the information and data that we are gathering to inform us on what makes some of these things engaging as well.
Thank you. Other questions for the panel? Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, just to follow up with what you were just talking about, I'm curious what kind of user research you guys do. So you were just talking about looking at analytics from a timing perspective, but do you ever do things like facial tracking or user groups for small kids?
Yeah, not quite to the facial tracking. What we did do is capture their experience on the screen. So I don't think we had cameras to say what the kid was looking at, but more around what were they doing? Were they naturally gravitating the mouse towards a particular place, or were they going somewhere else? Is probably more around that and less around the actual facial thing. And it's interesting. It is still perceived to be very invasive, and parents and kids. I mean, we are talking about regulations, right? We have, just like Jason's industry has regulations, we have COPA and FERPA and a lot of regulations. So we need to be a little careful around how intrusive those monitoring things can get, but we are trying to do some of those things, and we do quite a bit of usability testing on our interfaces before we actually start building. We like to get a sense of what is it that they look at.
Here's a question coming from the mobile app, question for Jason. How do you foster innovation in such a large organization like Kindred? It's assuming that you have many people that have been with the company for so many years.
Yeah, one thing we've taken at Kindred, particularly in our rehabilitation division, is, I'm blessed with a lot of therapists who are kind of in that digital native millennial group, and they like that job for lifestyle, for the hours, but also this greater sense of noble purpose that they're getting people home faster and getting people back to their prior level of function. So we've really engaged with them. We probably have 17,000 iPads and iTouches that are integral part of both the operation, but then it allows us to now kind of build and discover at the same time as we're tracking the patients. We're able to use that to connect with through our various applications, not only for big data and analytics, which is really important in healthcare and where we're moving, but then also as we try to touch more into our customer through the digital experience. So so that has kind of given us a nice tech platform with a workforce that is very engaged into technology. So we can kind of use that across 47 states that we have our operations to really deliver in a much more rapid pace, using a lot of different learning platforms through 7-minute videos and early good adult education. All those are able to now be fast tracked very quickly with our workforce. So that's kind of how we've done it with our platform.
Great. Are there any other questions for the panel out here? Any coming in from the app at all?
Andres, are you getting the questions on your app as well? Do you have those?
I don't know. I haven't even opened it. Sorry, Caro.
No, Andres, we have a few more minutes, so if you want to kind of maybe ask the last question, and then we'll wrap up this panel. Oh, here's a question in the front row.
We have one here.
Yes. Jason, I guess that working with elderly people must pose some challenges in terms of what to expect. It's totally different perhaps to the nature of dealing with kids who you may get the assumption that everyone is well versed into digital devices. How did it prove to you?
So if I heard you correctly, it was in terms of obviously diverse patient population, probably less workforce, but the patient population is that we've found that like in a lot of industries is with the digital part is that we're really connecting with what we call the chief mom officer, right? This individual is probably between ages of 40 to 60 that are in charge of generally like 3 generations of healthcare. And with a lot of the work you guys are doing is you're making that part of the consumer base very dependent on how technology drives their life, and so we're seeing that if we can really get to the consumer behavior on that particular individual, we are really fast tracking, at least from the consumer experience, with how we are using healthcare in the digital way. But we have to be very sensitive, as I mentioned earlier, is you can't just go all in a revolutionary way into tech is the way we're going to do these things. It's still the patient-family conference, the bedside engagement of our therapist with our physician with the individual. We're using technology as more of that enabler in a very simple form, right? Not here's the whole medical chart, let's run through it. It's how do you keep it very visual, how do you create a digital emotional journey, and that's where we're seeing tech being very helpful in that way.
Any other? Good. The last just want to just,
Give us a sense of timing. How long does it take for you to, how do you go through the product life cycle? How do you introduce new features, rollouts? Give us some sense of what the timelines are in your organizations for the applications that are user-facing.
So I may contradict what I said, which is we have to think a lot and introduce. We actually introduced 10 new courses and a platform, complete all of them in about 10 months. So we do things fast. I think what we tend to do when I said about the timing is that we spend quite a bit of time upfront on research, right? Is this the right way to teach a particular kid? But once we decide which way to go, then it becomes pretty darn fast. And we do roll out things, but somewhere between 9 months for a complete product, and features we tend to do it almost every month, every month or every other month. But we need to be careful with not completely disrupting the experience. But in general, we tend to do things pretty quickly.
I can just speak on, it could obviously go in different phases. I mentioned compliance earlier. So our work with Globant and Interact was actually a pretty fast experience coming from where, first of all, we probably went about it all wrong, where, okay, it's a bunch of executives and compliance experts in this case who think they're experts. They just go and launch something out there and use a technology platform. Very backwards thinking for many of you guys in the room. So really, with the work with Interact, first, getting to understand our consumer, which was that physician, understanding the context of the rules of engagement, and then really working with Globant. We were in an agile way. We were able to take that from concept to execution, I think, within 5-6 months. So that, and then obviously test it with that physician consumer, and it's just gotten huge accolades, and that we really understood how the doctor was thinking and what was necessary in their day-to-day operation. So now at the consumer side, a little bit longer, for sure, as we don't want to mess up how the care delivery platform that's been very successful for us for 20, 30 years without too much disruption too quickly.
Any other?
Oh, we're right over here.
This will be the last question. There it is.
You got it.
Thanks. Due to the domain that you're working, that emotional engagement of your customer is critical, but also can have huge consequences due to the aspect and impact in personal life. Do you think that you defer, or you have any restriction or things you have to take in account in terms of innovation and being disruptive that limits you due to the aspect of your platforms?
I'll take a crack at this. If we get it wrong, we're out of business. Ours is a very emotional connection. This is about saving men's lives and getting back those 6 years that men die younger than women. So for us, and it can be very brand damaging, so we spend actually a lot of time thinking about how do we actually go out to market and talk about what we're trying to get to, and leverage a lot of clinicians and other experts in the various fields that we work in to make sure that we get that message right. So not many folks know this about us, but we are heavily invested in suicide prevention amongst men. And you have to be extremely careful in that space about how you deliver the message you're trying to get across, because it can be actually very emotive for a lot of folks, those that have ideated, have attempted, or have lost someone to suicide. So we take it very seriously. I mean, it's probably one of the core risks that we face in our business. If we get that wrong, one, we could affect an individual, and two, we could affect what we're trying to do in this world, which is really just damage the brand beyond any kind of repair.
This is the last one?
That was the last one. So yeah, go ahead.
So to wrap up, I think, we've just going back to the very, very first, why we're doing this panel is we believe in evolution. We believe that disruption is just it's a trendy word. Disruption as a function of, how you allowed it to disrupt. But disruption should be kind of moving to the next level and try to, execute to get to your strategy. Every vertical, as we kind of gather here, has its own way of treating and incorporating features and basically making innovation happen. But in overall, what we choose to achieve is, digital maturity overall. It's just a maturity path, not rather just basically launching things out there just for the sake of it. So thank you so much for your contribution, and welcome to San Francisco.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.